So I'm going to start the video with a bit of general information and things to consider if you're thinking about canning on a glass top stove. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you guys how I pressure can beans, because frankly, I love beans in my salad. I love chili. I love doing like beans on pasta. So I need a steady supply of beans. And with the price of groceries lately, actually buying bags of dried beans and taking the time and pressure canning myself, the amount of beans I get, it actually saves me quite a bit of money. Even if a can of beans is like $1.50, $2, it's cheaper for me to buy the bags and pressure can them. So if you're interested in learning on canning on a glass top stove, keep watching. So first things first, there are two types of glass top stoves out there. There are induction and there are radiant. My Samsung stove here is a radiant heat. So what a radiant heat means is there are heat elements underneath the glass. It creates heat, it transfers through the heat resistant elements, and that heat then heats the pot, and then the pot heats your food. Big thing with these that you need to consider is it's cycling the element on and off. So it's not a steady flow of heat that you would get like on a gas stove or an induction. You still need to consider a couple things for ceramic tops, whether it is the induction or the radiant heat. Number one thing you want to consider is that those heat resistant glass sections are only on the element of your ceramic top. That middle area and things like that, that is not heat resistant glass. So if you're moving a pot off, you never actually want to take that pot and move it onto an area that isn't an actual element, or even an element that's been turned off, because then you're suddenly going to change the heat on it and you can cause cracking or damaging on it. Number two, do not drag your pot on the ceramic top. One, it can cause scratching. Two, again, you end up with the issue of the entire top is not heat resistant ceramic glass. So again, you could have that very quick change in heat and cause cracking on your ceramic top. Number three, weight. Always, always, always check with your manual for your glass top stove and see what the weight restrictions are on your elements. Some stoves are standard across the board, where say every single element can handle approximately 50 pounds of weight. In the case of my stove, it said it was designed for canning, but when I contacted Samsung directly, the person I spoke to said specifically that this element here, which is a 3-size fast boil burner, is technically really the only one that's designed to carry a lot of weight because it is the largest burner as well. So this one burner is the one burner I use for water bath canning or pressure canning. If you're water bath canning, that's the other thing you need to consider when I mention weight there, is a water bath canner when it's full is going to be significantly heavier than a pressure canner. So you want to consider how much weight that water bath canner is going to be once it's got all your food in there and your water in there. Number five to consider is actually based on what type of glass top you have. So in the case of me with my radiant heat one, remember I said that the heat actually cycles on and off. That heat cycles on to heat it up, cycles off, and that's how it keeps the temperature. Whereas an induction keeps a steady low energy coming through. So if you're someone with a ceramic top radiant heat one like me, when you're pressure canning, you just kind of want to keep an eye on the wobbler on top and make sure that it is keeping that wobble that you want. It's not going too fast, it's not going too slow. So you might just have to adjust the heat slightly up or slightly down while you're canning. Whereas number six, and this is especially for pressure canning, make sure you can handle the weight of moving the pot off the element. Again, remember, you can't drag it, or you shouldn't drag it across the bottom on your stovetop because it'll scratch it. Big change in heat temperature. So what I like to do is once I have my, in the case of today, beans canned and my 3 quarts of water in here, I basically take this and make sure I can lift up, over, and down onto an element. I need to be able to lift and move that myself, because when you turn this element off, it stays hot because it's radiant heat. So when you're supposed to remove the pot from the heat, you can't just turn it off like a gas stove. You literally have to lift and move it physically off onto a heat pad or somewhere away from the heat. So if you're not able to lift, say, your water bath canner, once it's got everything in there and the water, you're not able to lift and move it like that, wait until there's someone around that can give you a hand to move it off for that last part. Pressure canning, again, you also want to make sure you can do that easily and steady, like you saw me do there, where you're essentially lifting straight up and over and down, because remember, the pot's still at pressure when you're taking it off the heat. So there's about 10 pounds of pressure in there. You don't want to be knocking that or moving it around or anything. Number 7, which a lot of people don't think about when they have a ceramic top, is your pot needs to be a completely smooth bottom pot. So this pressure canner that I got, you notice it's completely smooth, and this little part here is the element that's going to be hitting the glass. If you end up with the traditional canners, like the black and white ones you'd sometimes see with canning kits, they have the ridge and it comes down, and then the ridge on the outside edge. They were designed like that to limit the contact with the element to prevent warping. Problem with that on a ceramic top is, 1, you're creating a heat pocket. 2, depending on how you're cooking or if something sits for a while or anything like that, that heat pocket can cause suction and can do exactly what happened to my old stove, crack the ceramic top. So I used the black and white speckled canner top, and having that little air pocket, I'm 99% sure is what caused my ceramic top to crack, because it was sitting there going, and my ceramic top just kind of, I don't want to say exploded, but there's a loud snap and my top was cracked. So you always want to make sure your bottom is a completely smooth bottom. And you also want to check this with the size of the burner. You never want the smooth bottom of your pot to be any more than 1 inch outside of the burner. Again, that's related to the fact that that heat resistant glass is only in the element. So if your pot extends too far out and it's being heated, you're now putting that heat outside that heat resistant area. So make sure your pot bottom, that pot that's touching it, so you can see the element that's actually going to be touching is actually this, not the entire pot. So I want to use the element that's going to just be heating this right here. And even though, say, the element was this size, this part of the pot is more than 1 inch that would be outside the element, it's not actually touching the stove. So I just want to make sure this ring here is within the element. Okay, so now that we've gone on over some information on canning on a glass top, let's get into pressure canning some beans. So yesterday I got a couple beans together, and we'll go right over there. We really want to get our pressure canner up and going here. So I've got my pressure canner on here. I've got my tray for the bottom and my wobbler here. This pressure canner I believe came with a 15-pound weight. So I actually bought separate weights off Amazon, and I have a total of 10 pounds on my weight right here for where I am for the top of this pot. So what I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to get 3 quarts of water in this pot. So you can see that the little bit of beans that I had soaked overnight, I ended up having to transfer into a large pot here because they got significantly bigger. So what you can do is you can go ahead and you can boil these for a half hour, and then you'd want to put them into hot jars. But I actually prefer to can from room temperature. So I'm basically just going to give these guys a good rinse and then go ahead and jar them up in my sanitized jars. So you want to leave about 1 inch of headspace. If that's 3/4, that's about 1 inch there. A little bit of salt, and let's go. Okay, so I got 7 here, and my canner does 7, and I've got 1 extra and 1 kind of like half jar here. So what I'm going to do, because it's going to need to process for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, is I actually have some dried navy beans downstairs that I'm actually going to soak overnight. And then as soon as those are ready, I can process these with the navy beans. So right now, we're going to just worry about getting these 7 little jars here. So with the pressure canner not heated or anything, because I like everything at room temperature, I process this way mainly because I'll usually can something one day and then process it the next day. So I'm gonna fit the 7 jars inside here. Don't mind the writing on top of the lids. I had a bad habit of pre-labeling lids, and then I wouldn't need as many lids as I labeled. So I have stuff labeled. Yay. Luckily, I can clearly see that that is beans, not salsa. There we go. So you can see I've got our 7 cans in there. And what I'm going to do now, we're going to grab our lid, line up your triangle here with your triangle here. And we're going to give it a good twist on. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. There we go, good and snug. I'm not going to put the weight on yet. We want to get some steam coming out here, and I want to make sure this is down because that'll pop up when it gets to pressure. Got my gauge there. And I know on my stove it needs to sit around a 5 or 6, but you might have to check with this. So what I'll do is I know I want the second size burner while I'm doing this. And I don't want it all the way up. I want to slowly increase the temperature. So I'm going to start, there we go, at about a 2 for a couple minutes, and then I'll slowly bump it up to the probably around 5 or 6. But we're gonna kind of start it at a medium-low heat and start bringing it to temp. Okay, so we've slowly been increasing our temp. I ended up increasing the size of the burner because the burner I was using, the second one, was a little bit too small and wasn't heating up very well. So we've got the larger burner going here. I'm between a 6 and a 7 to get some steam coming out. And you can see it a little bit better if I had a piece of black paper behind or something there. But I'm getting, let's see if I can put my hand behind it maybe. Be careful because the steam will be hot. Well, you can see it's spitting a little bit. I have a stream of steam coming through there. So I set a 10-minute timer. I'm gonna let it have a steady stream of steam and spit for about 10 minutes before I go ahead and carefully put this on. Okay, so we've got, if I check my timer here, 2 minutes left to get the 10 minutes. So you can see we've got steam going here, and now we have steam coming out of here. This is totally fine, because once I put the rocker on, that's gonna pop up and seal. So in 2 minutes, I'll show you how to carefully put on the rocker. Okay, so our timer just went off. I've got my weight here with the 10 pound. I want to carefully put it on there. Now, be very careful because that is scorching hot steam. So I kind of just snap. There we go. I've got my burner kind of set a little bit above 6. You can hear it going. This is now sealed. And what I'm going to wait is for this to start rocking. And if you actually go to Presto's YouTube, they'll give you a video of the ideal speed that this should be rocking. So as the pressure in the pot builds, you'll see this go up, and once it gets to about 10, it'll kind of bounce between 10 and 12. And honestly, sometimes I've heard those gauges can't be overly accurate, 100%, so between 10 and 12 is fine. This should start rocking, and I'll show you guys what you want to get it rocking to. Okay, so you can see we're getting up to our 10 pounds of pressure, and this is starting to rock. And that's actually already rocking pretty nicely. So I'm gonna kind of adjust the dial here. It's about right. I normally have it in and around a 6. But I'm just gonna keep an eye on this for a minute or 2 here and make sure that it stays at that it doesn't change, because I'm using the Radiant Heat ceramic top. Remember, the element turns on and off, so I just want to make sure that it doesn't start rocking left or rocking too fast or anything. So right now you see how it's kind of like vibrating on there. That means there's too much air coming out, so I want to adjust the temperature because we want to keep the rock, not that kind of vibrate happening there. So in my notes I have that I normally have it like 3, 4, 5 to get a good wobble, so I've brought my temperature down here to like a 5, 4. because you can see it's just kind of got a steady stream. It's not getting to rock really. Getting a little better. Yeah, we don't want that. Okay, so I've got myself down to like a 3-4. And we're seeing a good steady wobble now, really. He's doing his little happy dance. There we go. That's what we want to be seeing. So now that I've noticed it's kind of staying at that kind of happy wobble for about a minute or so now, I'm going to set my timer, which for these small bean jars is going to be 1 hour and 15 minutes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it around the house in the kitchen so I can keep an eye on this and make sure that it stays at this. Again, with being the radiant heat and the element turning on and off, I just have to make sure. I might have to make a couple minute adjustments to my temperature as it's going. Okay, so our timer went off. This has been going for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Now this is where we want to lift and move it over. I don't want to take this rocker off or anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn my stove off because I have a tendency of forgetting to turn my stove off, so I do that first. And then it's going to be a very slow, gentle lift and move off. So now that we've got it over here, we're gonna let it cool and not touch it. We're waiting for this little thing right here, and we're gonna wait for that to drop. Once that drops, we're gonna remove the rocker. Okay, now we've got this dropped. So we're gonna go ahead and remove our rocker. I'm gonna set a 5-minute timer, and then in 5 minutes, I'm gonna come and unscrew the lid. Okay, so now we've waited 5 minutes. So now we're going to just twist the lid off, twist it open. And I was not told this when I did it the first time, so I got really confused. But you actually want to kind of press down and sideways. There we go. I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to wait another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to start shifting the lid over. Okay, so we've now let it sit for 5 minutes. So what we want to do is lift and give it a little bit crack open, and then every 5 minutes I'm going to shift it further over until it is totally open. So we've now got the top completely removed. We've got our beans in here. Still a little warm, so I'm going to let it sit for another couple minutes, and then we're going to grab our tongs, pull each can of beans out, and set it somewhere where they will not be touched for 24 hours. After 24 hours, I will loosen the rings, check the seals, and make sure everything's sealed okay, and we will have canned beans. Okay, so we've got our canned beans out and on some pads. They're going to sit here for 24 hours, and then I'm going to check them and check the seals and make sure that these guys are properly sealed, processed, and good to go. You'll notice there's a little bit of bubbling happening still in some of them. That's totally normal, but after 24 hours they should be good and settled. So let's check them in 24 hours. So it is the next day, and all of our lids are popped down. So what I'm going to do is I will go through and I will loosen all of these. That way, if they unseal, I can't do that with one hand. If they unseal, it'll be easy to tell, so I'll know to get rid of the jars. But that is how you pressure can some beans.